In the crisp winter air of Moscow on December 5, 2025, as world leaders gathered for the 23rd Annual Russia-India Summit, a joint statement emerged that sent subtle shockwaves through the corridors of power in Washington, Brussels, and Tokyo. Russian President Vladimir Putin and Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi announced a framework for bilateral trade settlements exceeding $150 billion, conducted predominantly in national currencies, the ruble and the rupee, bypassing the United States dollar entirely. This agreement, encompassing energy exports, infrastructure projects, and commodity trades, was framed as a natural evolution of economic partnership. Yet, beneath the diplomatic language lay a profound challenge to the global financial order, a deliberate acceleration of de-dollarization, coupled with the activation of new trade corridors that promise to reroute commerce away from Western-dominated routes. For the Group of 7 nations, long accustomed to steering international trade through dollar-based systems, this development was not just a bilateral deal but a harbinger of shifting alliances that could redefine global economic flows for decades to come. To understand the weight of this moment, we must peel back the layers of history, economics, and geopolitics that have led here, examining how such agreements came to fruition and what they portend for the world at large. Let us start with the essentials, assuming no prior knowledge of these intricate matters. De-dollarization refers to the process by which countries reduce their reliance on the United States dollar in international transactions, reserves, and settlements. The dollar has held a preeminent position since the end of World War II, established through the Bretton Woods Agreement in 1944. Under that system, the dollar was pegged to gold, and other currencies were pegged to the dollar, creating a stable framework for global trade. When the United States severed the gold link in 1971, the dollar's dominance persisted due to the petrodollar arrangement. Major oil producers like Saudi Arabia agreed to price and sell crude in dollars, recycling revenues into U.S. assets. This setup benefits the United States enormously. It can borrow at low interest rates, as foreign nations hold trillions in dollar-denominated reserves, and it wields influence through sanctions, freezing assets, or excluding entities from dollar-based payment systems like SWIFT, the Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunication. For Russia, de-dollarization is not an abstract ideal but a survival strategy. The country's economy, heavily reliant on energy exports, faced existential threats following Western sanctions imposed after its 2014 annexation of Crimea, and intensified after the 2022 invasion of Ukraine. These sanctions froze over $300 billion of Russia's foreign reserves, barred major banks from SWIFT, and restricted technology imports. In response, Moscow pivoted eastward, forging deeper ties with non-Western powers. India, the world's most populous nation and a rapidly growing economy, emerged as a key partner. Bilateral trade between Russia and India, historically modest at around $10 billion annually in the early 2010s, surged to over $65 billion by 2024, driven by discounted Russian oil shipments amid Western boycotts. This trade imbalance, India importing far more than it exports, created opportunities for currency swaps and local settlements, reducing exposure to dollar fluctuations and sanctions. The concept of trade corridors adds another dimension. These are integrated networks of roads, railways, ports, and pipelines designed to facilitate efficient movement of goods across vast distances. Traditional global trade relies on sea routes like the Suez Canal or the Strait of Malacca, controlled or influenced by Western powers. Russia's push for new corridors stems from necessity. Sanctions disrupted its access to European markets, prompting a focus on Asia and the global south. The International North-South Transport Corridor, or INSTC, exemplifies this. Spanning 12,000 kilometers from Russia through Azerbaijan, Iran, and into India, the INSTC combines rail, road, and sea links to cut transit times from 45 days via Suez to under 25 days, reducing costs by up to 60%. Conceived in 2000 by Russia, Iran, and India, the corridor languished until recent geopolitical shifts revived it. To trace the path to the December 2025 agreements, let us break down the sequence of events methodically, beginning in the early 2020s and building to the present. The catalyst was Russia's 2022 military actions in Ukraine, which prompted unprecedented sanctions from the G7, the United States, Canada, Japan, Germany, France, Italy, and the United Kingdom. By mid-2022, Russia had lost access to half its foreign reserves, forcing a rapid diversification. Moscow accelerated LKS with BRICS partners Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, a grouping formed in 2009 to amplify emerging economies' voices. At the 2022 BRICS summit, leaders discussed local currency settlements, with Russia and China settling over 60% of their trade in yuan and rubles by year's end. India's involvement deepened in 2023. Facing its own energy needs amid global price spikes, New Delhi ramped up purchases of Russian crude, reaching over 2 million barrels per day by late 2023, 40% of India's imports. To manage payments without dollars, the two nations established a rupee-ruble mechanism. Indian banks held rupee accounts for Russian exporters, convertible to rubles at agreed rates. This system processed over $20 billion in 2023 alone. Concurrently, infrastructure talks advanced. In September 2023, at the Eastern Economic Forum in Vladivostok, Putin and Modi discussed the Vladivostok-Chennai Maritime Corridor, a sea route linking Russia's Far East with India's southern ports, bypassing congested choke points. By 2024, momentum built. The INSTC saw its first major test shipments. In June, 2 coal trains from Russia arrived in India via Iran, covering 4,000 kilometers by rail and sea. Transit time 23 days. This success prompted investments. Russia allocated $15 billion for rail upgrades in its southern regions, while India committed $10 billion to port expansions in Chabahar, Iran, a strategic hub leased to India since 2016. Bilateral trade hit $100 billion that year, with 90% settled in national currencies. The BRICS summit in Kazan, Russia in October 2024 expanded the group to include Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, and the UAE, amplifying de-dollarization efforts. Leaders endorsed a blockchain-based payment platform, reducing SWIFT dependency. Entering 2025, geopolitical tensions escalated. U.S. tariffs under the re-elected Trump administration targeted Chinese and Indian goods, indirectly pressuring Russia's partners. In March, Russia and India signed a preliminary accord for $150 billion in cumulative deals over 5 years, focusing on energy, fertilizers, and metals. By July, at the BRICS finance ministers' meeting in Rio de Janeiro, commitments solidified. Russia agreed to supply India with discounted LNG via the Northern Sea Route, an Arctic shipping lane opening due to climate change, valued at $30 billion annually. In September, trial runs on the INSTC expanded to include containerized goods, with volumes tripling from 2024. The climax arrived on December 5, 2025 in Moscow. The joint statement outlined 3 corridors: the INSTC for land-based trade, the Vladivostok-Chennai route for maritime links, and an emerging Arctic pathway. Total projected value, $150 billion into dollarized trade by 2030, with immediate settlements in rupees and rubles for oil, gas, and uranium. This shocked G7 observers. Intelligence briefs in Washington noted the deal's potential to erode dollar demand, as Russia redirected exports from Europe, worth $200 billion pre-2022, to Asia. Beyond these visible steps, hidden or less discussed factors reveal the deal's strategic depth. Geopolitically, Russia's isolation from the West accelerated alliances with non-aligned powers. India, balancing ties with the U.S. through the Quad alliance, views Russia as a counterweight to China. Less publicized is Iran's role. As a corridor linchpin, Tehran provides transit amid its own sanctions, securing revenue from fees. Environmentally, the INSTC reduces carbon emissions by shortening routes, though Arctic shipping raises concerns over melting permafrost and indigenous rights. Economically, shadow banking plays a part. Russian firms use offshore entities in Dubai and Singapore to facilitate rupee-ruble conversions, evading scrutiny. Politically, domestic imperatives drive action. Putin's regime bolsters legitimacy through economic resilience, while Modi's Make in India initiative absorbs Russian investments in manufacturing. An underreported aspect is technology transfer. Deals include joint ventures in nuclear energy and defense, with Russia supplying S-400 systems paid in rupees. The global implications are profound and multifaceted. For the G7, the shock stems from diminished leverage. Sanctions lose bite if targets bypass dollar systems. Russia's economy, projected to grow 3% in 2025 despite isolation, demonstrates this. Dollar reserves globally dipped below 60% in 2025 as BRICS nations stockpile gold. Russia and India added over 500 tons combined. This erosion could raise U.S. borrowing costs as foreign demand for treasuries wanes, exacerbating deficits exceeding $2 trillion annually. Emerging markets benefit unevenly. The INSTC opens access for landlocked Central Asian states like Kazakhstan, fostering regional integration. Africa, through BRICS ties, gains alternative financing via the New Development Bank, lending $50 billion in 2025 without Western conditionalities. However, risks loom: currency volatility if ruble or rupee weakens, or disruptions from conflicts in Iran or the Arctic. On a systemic scale, this accelerates multipolarity. Trade corridors like INSTC challenge Western choke points, potentially rerouting 10% of global cargo by 2030. Climate change factors in. Warmer Arctic routes cut fuel use but risk spills in fragile ecosystems. For consumers, cheaper goods from efficient corridors could lower prices, though initial disruptions raise energy costs. In conclusion, Russia's $150 billion de-dollarization deals with India, announced in December 2025, represent more than bilateral commerce. They signal a reconfiguration of global power. Shocking the G7 by undermining dollar hegemony, these agreements, paired with new trade corridors, change everything by fostering resilient networks beyond Western control. For Russia, they affirm survival amid adversity. For India, strategic autonomy in a turbulent world. Yet, interdependence endures. The global economy thrives on connectivity, not fragmentation. As we reflect on this pivot, it invites caution. Hasty de-dollarization could spark volatility, harming the vulnerable. The path forward lies in inclusive reforms, updating multilateral institutions like the IMF for equitable representation, negotiating transparent trade rules, and addressing environmental costs. In an era of shifting alliances, true progress demands dialogue over division, ensuring economic tools serve humanity's shared future rather than narrow interests. The corridors now opening may lead not to confrontation, but to a more balanced world order. As the year 2025 concludes, the outcomes of the 23rd India-Russia Annual Summit held in New Delhi on December 5 have solidified a trajectory of deepening economic cooperation between the two nations, one that emphasizes diversification, resilience, and a measured shift towards settlements in national currencies. The summit, hosted by Prime Minister Narendra Modi and attended by President Vladimir Putin, resulted in the adoption of an economic cooperation program extending through 2030, with an expressed ambition to elevate bilateral trade to $100 billion annually by that date. This framework builds on current volumes, approximately $68.7 billion in the fiscal year ending March 2025, and highlights a commitment to uninterrupted energy supplies, joint ventures in manufacturing, and enhanced connectivity. While not framed as a direct confrontation with established financial systems, the increasing use of rubles and rupees in transactions, reportedly covering over 90% of direct payments, represents a practical step in reducing exposure to external currency risks. For observers in the group of 7 nations, these developments underscore the evolving preferences of major emerging economies for autonomous trade mechanisms and alternative routes that prioritize efficiency and strategic alignment. To contextualize these agreements, it is essential to understand the broader dynamics of international trade and currency usage. Bilateral trade between nations often involves settlements in a third currency, historically the United States dollar, due to its liquidity, stability, and widespread acceptance in global markets. This arrangement allows exporters and importers to hedge against fluctuations in their domestic currencies and facilitates access to deep financial networks. However, reliance on a single dominant currency introduces vulnerabilities. Exchange rate volatility can erode profits, and restrictions on access to payment systems can disrupt flows. For Russia and India, the push toward national currency settlements addresses these concerns directly. India, with its growing demand for energy and commodities, benefits from predictable pricing in rupees, while Russia secures markets for its exports amid constraints on traditional Western channels. The progression toward the 2030 program has been incremental, shaped by both opportunity and necessity. Bilateral trade volumes remain modest through the 2010s, hovering around $10 to $15 billion annually, supported by long-standing defense and energy ties. The turning point arrived in 2022 when global energy markets experienced upheaval. Russia, redirecting exports following shifts in European demand, offered discounted crude to Asian buyers. India emerged as a significant purchaser, with imports rising substantially and contributing to trade reaching over $60 billion by 2023-2024. To facilitate these transactions without accumulating excessive dollar exposures, central banks on both sides developed mechanisms for rupee-ruble exchanges. By early 2025, reports indicated that the majority of payments for energy and other goods in national currencies, a figure that approached 96% in certain categories by year's end. Infrastructure initiatives complemented this financial reorientation. The International North-South Transport Corridor, a multimodal network linking Russia to India via Iran and the Caspian region, saw tangible advancements throughout 2025. Test shipments increased, with cargo volumes demonstrating reduced transit times and costs compared to conventional maritime routes. Complementary efforts, such as upgrades to ports and rail links, supported greater flow of goods including fertilizers, metals, and agricultural products. These corridors not only shorten distances but also diversify pathways, mitigating risks associated with congested or geopolitically sensitive choke points. The December summit consolidated these trends. Discussions focused on balancing the trade structure, currently skewed toward Russian exports, through increased Indian shipments in pharmaceuticals, machinery, and services. Agreements covered cooperation in nuclear energy, critical minerals, and manufacturing, with commitments to remove non-tariff barriers and explore investment protection frameworks. Energy security featured prominently, with assurances of continued supplies of oil, gas, and coal. Progress toward a potential free trade agreement with the Eurasian Economic Union was noted as a priority, potentially expanding market access for both sides. Several less discussed elements influenced the summit's outcomes. Internally, India's pursuit of energy affordability aligns with domestic growth imperatives, while Russia's need for reliable partners sustains economic stability amid external pressures. The role of multilateral forums, including BRICS, provided a platform for coordinating approaches to payment systems and commodity exchanges. Environmental considerations emerged in dialogues on sustainable transport and low-carbon development, reflecting shared interests in efficient logistics. Challenges persist, however. Trade imbalances require ongoing management, and mechanisms for currency convertibility demand further refinement to ensure liquidity and trust. The implications extend across the global economic landscape. For established advanced economies, the growing preference for national currency settlements and alternative corridors illustrates the diversification strategies of major traders. This does not imply an abrupt displacement of existing systems, but a gradual broadening of options, potentially influencing reserve management and transaction costs worldwide. Emerging markets gain from enhanced connectivity, facilitating access to resources and markets outside traditional hubs. Commodity flows, particularly energy, may experience greater stability through direct bilateral channels. Systemic shifts appear measured rather than revolutionary. The dollar retains substantial utility in global finance due to institutional depth and network effects. Efforts like those between Russia and India demonstrate pragmatic adaptations, enhancing resilience without necessitating wholesale restructuring. Multilateral institutions continue to evolve, accommodating diverse preferences through reforms in representation and financing. In conclusion, the Economic Cooperation Program through 2030, formalized at the December 2025 summit, reflects a mature phase in Russia-India relations, one grounded in mutual benefit and strategic foresight. By targeting balanced growth to $100 billion while prioritizing national currencies and efficient corridors, the partnership contributes to a more pluralistic trade environment. This evolution invites reflection on the nature of interdependence in a changing world. Nations seek autonomy not in isolation but through reliable alliances that distribute risks equitably. For the international community, these developments highlight the value of inclusive mechanisms, updated trade rules, transparent investment frameworks, and cooperative infrastructure that accommodate rising economies while preserving stability. As corridors expand and settlements diversify, the global economy stands to gain from greater resilience, provided dialogue bridges differences and prioritizes shared prosperity over division. The agreements of 2025, viewed in their full context, affirm that progress arises from deliberate, cooperative steps toward a balanced and sustainable order. As 2026 dawns, the framework established by the Russia-India Economic Cooperation Program through 2030 has begun to manifest in concrete initiatives, marking a phase of implementation rather than mere declaration. The program's core objectives, achieving balanced annual bilateral trade of $100 billion, expanding settlements in national currencies, and enhancing physical connectivity through multimodal corridors, have guided policy actions in the opening months of the year. Early indicators suggest steady progress. Energy flow remain uninterrupted, joint ventures in priority sectors have advanced to feasibility stages, and trial shipments along key routes demonstrate improved efficiency. These developments, while evolutionary in character, contribute to a broader pattern of economic diversification among major emerging powers, one that prioritizes reliability, cost reduction, and autonomy in trade financing. For established, advanced economies monitoring these trends, the implications lie not in immediate disruption but in the gradual emergence of complementary networks that broaden options for global commerce. The mechanics of national currency settlements merit closer examination, as they form the financial backbone of this partnership. When two countries trade in their own currencies, exporters receive payment in their domestic unit, and importers pay in theirs, often facilitated by central bank arrangements or commercial bank correspondent relationships. This eliminates the need for conversion through a third currency, reducing transaction costs, typically 1 to 2% in foreign exchange fees, and shielding participants from volatility in external rates. For India and Russia, the rupee-ruble mechanism has matured through accumulated experience. Indian refiners, for instance, settle oil purchases in rupees deposited into Vostro accounts, special accounts held by foreign banks in the importer's currency, at designated Indian institutions. Russian exporters then utilize these funds for Indian goods or convert portions through agreed channels. By early 2026, reports from the Reserve Bank of India indicate that such arrangements cover the vast majority of bilateral energy transactions, with extensions into fertilizers, pharmaceuticals, and engineering products. Infrastructure development has paralleled these financial adjustments. The International North-South Transport Corridor continues to expand capacity, with coordinated investments in rail gauges, port handling facilities, and customs harmonization. Recent shipments have included diversified cargo, Russian coal and timber moving southward, while Indian textiles and machinery travel northward. Complementary routes, such as maritime links between Vladivostok and Indian eastern ports, have seen increased vessel calls, supported by ice-class navigation in northern waters during viable seasons. These pathways collectively offer shorter transit times and lower freight costs compared to traditional Suez or Cape routes, providing tangible benefits in an era of elevated shipping insurance and fuel expenses. Implementation in the opening quarter of 2026 has focused on addressing structural imbalances. India's exports to Russia, historically constrained by market size and regulatory differences, have received targeted support through streamlined certification processes and promotional delegations. Sectors identified for growth include information technology services, agricultural processing, and generic pharmaceuticals, areas where Indian firms hold competitive advantages. Russian investments in Indian manufacturing zones, particularly for fertilizers and critical minerals processing, have progressed to groundbreaking stages. Energy cooperation remains foundational. Long-term contracts ensure stable supplies of crude, liquefied natural gas, and coal with pricing mechanisms that reflect mutual interest in predictability. Several underlying factors continue to shape this trajectory. Domestically, both nations navigate growth imperatives amid global uncertainties. India's expanding middle class and industrialization drive demand for affordable resources, while Russia's economy seeks diversified revenue streams and technology partnerships. Multilateral engagement through BRICS and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization provides forums for aligning standards and resolving technical hurdles. Environmental and sustainability considerations increasingly inform corridor planning, with emphasis on rail over road to minimize emissions and Arctic route management to protect fragile ecosystems. Challenges persist and warrant careful management. Trade imbalances, though reduced, require ongoing mechanisms for rupee accumulation and utilization. Currency convertibility outside direct bilateral channels remains limited, necessitating creative solutions such as third-country trade or investment conversion. Infrastructure projects face financing and logistical complexities, particularly in transit nations where geopolitical stability varies. The broader implications unfold gradually across the international landscape. For major economies accustomed to predominant financial networks, the expansion of alternative settlement and transport options illustrates the adaptability of global trade. Commodity flows gain additional pathways, potentially enhancing supply security for importers and market access for exporters. Emerging economies observe viable models for reducing external vulnerabilities without ISIL. Aiding from established systems, reserve management practices may evolve incrementally, reflecting diversified preferences among central banks. Systemic resilience emerges as a central theme. The coexistence of multiple settlement currencies and routes distributes risks more evenly, mitigating disruptions from regional conflicts or policy shifts. Innovation in payment technologies, digital platforms, and blockchain pilots supports efficiency gains while maintaining interoperability where beneficial. In conclusion, the Russia-India Economic Cooperation Program, as it enters its implementation phase in 2026, exemplifies a pragmatic approach to bilateral and regional integration. By pursuing balanced growth, national currency utilization, and efficient connectivity, the partnership contributes to a more diverse and resilient global trade architecture. This evolution reflects broader trends toward multipolarity, where nations enhance sovereignty through cooperation rather than isolation. For the international community, these developments reinforce the importance of adaptable institutions, reformed multilateral frameworks, transparent standards for digital finance, and inclusive infrastructure planning that accommodate varied economic models while safeguarding shared stability. As corridors strengthen and financial links mature, the global economy stands poised for greater equilibrium, provided collaboration bridges differences and prioritizes mutual benefit. The steps taken in 2025 and early 2026, viewed in their full context, affirm that sustainable progress arises from deliberate, inclusive engagement in an interconnected world. As the first half of 2026 unfolds, the Russia-India Economic Cooperation Program has transitioned from planning to measurable execution, with quarterly reviews indicating alignment toward the targeted $100 billion in annual bilateral trade by 2030. Energy deliveries have proceeded without interruption. Infrastructure projects along key corridors have advanced to construction phases, and the proportion of transactions settled in national currencies has stabilized at levels exceeding 90% for direct bilateral flows. These outcomes reflect disciplined coordination between central banks, trade ministries, and private enterprises, supported by regular technical working groups. The partnership's emphasis on balanced growth, addressing India's export potential in high-value sectors while securing Russia's resource supplies, demonstrates a structured approach to long-term economic interdependence. In the wider context of global trade, this steady implementation contributes to the ongoing diversification of settlement practices and transport networks, offering participants greater flexibility while maintaining integration with established systems. The operational details of national currency trade provide insight into the program's practicality. Settlements in rupees and rubles rely on a network of Vostro and Nostro accounts, specialized banking arrangements where funds are held in the importer's currency for the exporter's use. Indian banks designated under Reserve Bank guidelines maintain rupee accounts for Russian entities, enabling payments for energy imports without immediate conversion. Russian banks, in turn, hold ruble accounts accessible to Indian exporters of pharmaceuticals, machinery, and agricultural products. This closed-loop system minimizes foreign exchange risk and reduces dependency on external liquidity pools. By mid-2026, the volume processed through these channels has supported consistent trade flows, with mechanisms in place to manage periodic imbalances through investment conversions or third-party trade facilitation. Connectivity initiatives have yielded visible progress. Along the international north-south transport corridor, synchronized investments have enhanced throughput capacity at critical nodes, including rail ferries across the Caspian Sea and upgraded highways in transit countries. Regular container services now operate on predictable schedules, carrying diversified cargoes that include Russian fertilizers destined for Indian agriculture and Indian engineering goods moving northward. Maritime components of the corridor, linking Iranian ports with Indian facilities, have benefited from expanded berthing and cargo handling infrastructure. These improvements translate into reduced logistics costs and shorter delivery times, factors that enhance competitiveness for both economies in regional markets. Efforts to rebalance trade composition have gained traction. Indian exports have shown particular strength in generic pharmaceuticals, information technology services, and processed foods, sectors where regulatory alignment and quality standards facilitate market entry. Russian counterparts have focused on expanding non-energy shipments, including metals, timber, and specialized equipment. Joint production arrangements, local assembly of and designed machinery using Indian components or co-processing of critical minerals have moved beyond memoranda to operational planning, with site selections and technology transfer protocols under negotiation. These ventures aim not only to address numerical imbalances but to create value-added supply chains resilient to external disruptions. Several underlying dynamics continue to influence this trajectory. Economic priorities remain paramount. India's sustained growth requires affordable access to energy and raw materials, while Russia seeks stable demand and investment outlets amid constrained traditional markets. Diplomatic engagement through established forums ensures alignment on technical standards and dispute resolution. Sustainability considerations increasingly shape project design, with preferences for rail and multimodal transport to lower carbon footprints compared to long-haul shipping. Digital tools, secure platforms for documentation and tracking support transparency and efficiency across borders. Persistent challenges demand ongoing attention. Structural differences in regulatory environments require harmonization efforts, particularly for perishable goods and high-technology items. Financing for large infrastructure remains a focus, blending public commitments with private participation under risk-sharing models. Currency mechanisms, while effective bilaterally, interface with broader international systems where convertibility and liquidity present practical limits. The wider implications manifest gradually within the global economic framework. Major economies observe the expansion of viable alternative channels for trade, finance, and logistics, illustrating the adaptability of commercial relationships to diverse preferences. Commodity markets benefit from additional routing options, potentially stabilizing supply chains for essential inputs. Developing nations gain reference points for pursuing balanced partnerships that prioritize mutual growth over unilateral dependence. Systemic evolution appears as incremental enhancement rather than fundamental rupture. Established financial networks retain substantial advantages in depth and universality, while emerging arrangements provide complementary pathways. This coexistence fosters resilience, distributing operational risks across multiple channels and reducing vulnerability to localized disruptions. In conclusion, the Russia-India Economic Cooperation Program, as it progresses through 2026, exemplifies sustained commitment to pragmatic, mutually beneficial integration. Through disciplined execution of trade balancing, currency diversification, and infrastructure development, the partnership strengthens economic ties while contributing to a more varied global trade ecosystem. This measured advancement reflects the broader transition toward multipolarity, where nations enhance strategic options through cooperation and shared investment. For the international community, these developments underscore the merits of flexible, inclusive approaches, updated multilateral rules, collaborative standards for emerging technologies, and equitable infrastructure governance that accommodate diverse models without compromising collective stability. As implementation deepens, the program affirms that enduring progress emerges from consistent, transparent engagement, building resilience and prosperity in an interconnected yet dynamic world.